Hello and welcome to Being Athletic in Perimenopause and Beyond, the masterclass series where we're bringing together experts in mindset, nutrition, training, recovery. My name is Tennille Hoogland. I am an integrated health and sport performance coach, inspiring women in midlife through education and coaching to embody excellence in sport, health, and life. And I am so thrilled to have Rebekah Rotstein here today as our guest. And boy, are we ever going to get into a whole lot of whole structural health and bone health and what that actually means. So welcome, welcome.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
I want to share with the world a little bit about you. So I've already asked and mentioned that I'm going to take some liberties on what I say about your incredible bio. So first and foremost, you are the founder of Buff Bones, an exercise method for bone and joint health.
Yes.
What your bio doesn't necessarily say is that it is actually one of the most widely respected programs, given its incredible global reach, with instructors in over 30 countries, putting out this exercise method. You are aligned with prestigious partnerships such as Johns Hopkins Rehabilitation Network, and you really put out a lot of free education, webinars with UCLA Health, and here in doing this type of interview and many others. So what fascinates me about how you came to this work, and I'd love you to comment on this a little bit more, is that you actually had a diagnosis of osteoporosis at the age of 28. And this projected, was this really partly in part, other than your love of movement, you were a dancer before, was this in part the impetus for you to really go forward and understand more about how am I going to deal with this? I'm 28 years old. This wasn't supposed to be something that was part of my life, and it projected you onto the path that you're on. Is that
Yes.
right?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify that it's not a partnership with Johns Hopkins, but that we trained their physical therapy and occupational staff. We ran our program there.
Yeah.
And yes, you're right that it is just my background in movement that led me on this journey, but really it's also what was the source in many ways of the osteoporosis diagnosis in the first place. So when I was a ballet dancer many years ago, like many, as you know, many high intensity athletes and high performance athletes, I stopped menstruating. And as such, now we know about low energy availability and REDS, but at the time, this wasn't talked about.
Yeah.
And so it affected my bone status, basically. I wasn't able to achieve peak bone mass because I didn't have sufficient estrogen in my
Right.
system. So my bones essentially suffered to some degree. Fortunately, I never fractured and I never knew that there was a problem. And I probably, hopefully, would not have known, even to this day, that there was a problem had I never gotten a bone density test. Because first of all, whether it's bone loss or even just low bone density that's never achieved peak bone mass is totally asymptomatic. You don't feel anything.
Right.
I had no idea there was anything going on. It was only by the fact that I got a bone density scan that I knew this. And the only reason I got a bone density scan was because of a course that I had taken for some advanced coursework on osteoporosis. Because I was already a teacher trainer at a facility in New York City where I lived at the time. So I was training other people to become Pilates instructors, and I took some additional coursework. And in that, I learned that you achieve a majority of your bone density in your teenage years.
Yeah.
So all these light bulbs started going off at the time between, oh my goodness, wait, I wasn't menstruating during those critical times. Osteoporosis runs in my family. I am very, very small boned. I'm very fair skinned. And I started piecing together all these puzzle pieces and
Right.
thought, well, let me just get a baseline for later. So that's kind of the background on it that is relevant because this all relates back to my background in dance.
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, when I was diagnosed with osteoporosis, I had the benefit of already knowing a lot about the body because at this point I was already a Pilates teacher
Yeah.
and I had already done anatomy, physiology work.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, yes, my interest and eagerness to try and solve this was obviously very personal because I wanted to figure out how I could avoid fracturing. But also, I wanted to see how does this relate with movement and what else can be done.
And thank you for the segue. So that is really how you started delving into, so like you mentioned here, you were an athletic trainer, you then became a Pilates instructor, and your keen interest in the human body on so many levels. So you take this whole understanding of physiological science, looking at cadavers, and you love fascia, and and which is super cool because you don't meet many people that know visceral manipulation. And maybe you want to just explain that a little bit, because most people won't even really know what that means.
So, visceral manipulation is a technique through the Barral Institute that was developed by Jean-Pierre Barral, who is a French osteopath, brilliant French osteopath, and he identified these subtle movements that exist within the organs. So, viscera is the term for organs. So, visceral manipulation deals with this motility and natural motion, very, very subtle, very, very subtle. So you have to really train your hands to identify and
So
experience
subtle.
it,
Yeah.
sense it. But also the mobility of organs. So if you just turn and you twist right here in your chair, there is a mobility between organs and gliding, sliding, if you will. Because the outer covering, if you will, also of the organs is fascia, is connective tissue. People think of connective tissue as just surrounding muscles, and it's far more than that.
Yeah.
So it's addressing the fascia with these organs. I got interested in it actually because I had a session from a body worker, gosh, this had to be at least 20 years ago now. And I had this intense emotional experience. Like I just started
Oh,
crying, bawling on the table.
yeah. Yeah.
I was like, what did you do? What just happened? And he said that his background, what he was doing was visceral manipulation. And I said, oh my gosh, I have to learn what this stuff is. This is phenomenal. And for me, it's very profound because in my body, that's where a lot of the things get stuck,
Yeah.
literally, and then also emotions often get held within your viscera. So I've been really fascinated with it for a while, and I just think it's really brilliant, brilliant work.
I cannot agree with you more. It has been life-changing for me from both, and I agree with you fully from an emotional perspective, and obviously physiological. I had challenges for a long time, and then an incredible massage therapist who had trained extensively in visceral manipulation brought things out in me that I was like, oh wow, that's really something, because I don't go there, and to this day that that connection is incredible. So this again points to something else that you also bring into your work, which I think when we think of bone health, we think lift heavy, go strong, let's do it. And athletes or athletic women are just known, okay, so what do I need to do? But you also really speak a lot to the interoception and how we feel, and understanding like where is it that we're stuck. So I want to bring that into, and that expertise that you also have, into this conversation. So I could keep going on about your bio, but if please check out more of the work that Rebekah has done, because it is right at the top of, including things like being on the medical advisory committee for the National Menopause Foundation. It goes on, and in terms of this work, this interview that we have today is of such privilege because of where the influence it, has. So here we are. Okay, I've got an idea. This is what I'd like to do, Rebekah. I would like to propose a case study here. And so we can really embody this beautiful human female, and she is in perimenopause. So she's right in the thick of it, you could even say. Her symptoms are okay. She's rolling through as one could. It's not horrible, and it's not and really stopping her from living her life or being active, and it's not completely easy. And she just got a diagnosis of osteopenia. And so the attitude of so many women that are listening to this is like they want to do the right things, and the measures that we have is like, okay, I know, or the things that we've been told is I know need to eat more calcium or have calcium, I need to lift heavy and just keep getting that T-score. And it's like, okay, I should also say she's a runner. She loves running, and she
Mm.
loves going like this, and if you're just listening to this, it's just like this linear way of working, and just, being in the trees, soulful love, all of this thing. And that's what she's done for most of her life, and may have had an impact on this. So where I want to ask you is, when we think of all the things that you've told us about yourself and your expertise, how do we let's first come into the foundation of our health and think about things like, I know you're an expert and do training on the lumbopelvic spine and how we move, and how and our posture. So can you take us through, when you talk to this beautiful person, where is it that we can actually start at the foundation?
There's so many entry points here.
I know. Welcome.
Well, I want to point out, in case I forget later, you added a great little variable to this case study, which is somebody who's a runner.
Mm.
So even though this isn't where I would start in conversing with her, I do want to mention this in case I forget later. Because as you pointed out, running is a very, what we'd call a linear motion, sagittal plane, meaning the direction you walk in, right? You're moving forward. It could also be going backward, but usually you're only running forward. And one of the various challenges with that is that we need multi-planar movement. Now, even in that linear activity, the mechanics of the spine are actually rotation. So rotation is happening despite us realizing that. But for one thing, we need to make sure also that she's cross training, because she needs to be doing lateral or side movements. She needs to be doing some rotational movement to some degree. And I'll come back to that in the discussion of osteoporosis. But just in my work with runners throughout the years, one of the biggest problems with runners is their glutes are often shut down.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that that is part of her training, not yet, but that we come back to. But from your starting point, there's a bunch of things that I want to know. It's not just a matter of, oh, osteoporosis or osteopenia. I want to know a lot more about her history, about her medical history. So is this a situation where, well, several different things. Okay, is this a primary osteoporosis category, which is related to sex hormone changes? If she's perimenopausal, maybe not though. Is there quote unquote secondary osteoporosis, which is related to, and I should say bone loss also, related to other medications or medical conditions? So is it a situation like mine where, had she stopped menstruating, or even has she ever had any disordered eating history? These are things that are totally separate from age-related bone loss. I also would want to know even more about this, though. What has she ever been on glucocorticosteroids, another cause of secondary bone loss? I'd want to know really a whole history of her.
Right.
She ever have a cancer treatment? Like all these things that are related to bone loss that are not related to age, that that we do know will affect the quality of your bones, that is completely separate from maybe she's just a small boned person and the quality of her bones might be fine. We don't really know that without having additional testing. So I mean, this could be like a very, very long conversation.
Yes.
So many
Yeah.
ways to go into this, but there are just the quick overview is that the DEXA is what has determined that she has osteopenia.
Yeah.
because that's the only way they would know. If she'd ever had a fracture, that automatically would classify her as having osteoporosis.
Okay.
So just to be clear, so we know that she's had a DEXA because that's how she knows she has osteopenia, which is, by the way, for everybody listening, is the precursor to osteoporosis. It means there is low bone mass, but not to the extent of which is classified and quantified as osteoporosis. So we know she has that, but do we really know that the bone quality is poor? We don't. We would want additional testing to identify that. And it's not as widely available is the key. That's the big answer, is it's not so easy to get.
Yeah, people don't talk about that. So when you say quality, I know that we could talk for hours, which isn't the intention here. So are you able to summarize, what do you mean by quality?
So, the original definition of osteoporosis talked about and mentioned, I should say, a low bone mass or loss of bone mass along with structural deterioration of the bone. So it was dual. And we've gone into this binary discussion of osteoporosis. It's only based on the number. In other
That's
words,
right.
your bone density score. But it's not just that, it's also about structural change. And so when I started researching this 20 years ago, I started coming across this discussion in the research, in the literature about quality, but I wasn't hearing about it anywhere else. Now you do hear it and you see it, and there are actual tests. So the way traditionally quality was measured was through CT scans, which are really just for research purposes and not for clinical practice. It's very expensive, and
Yeah.
it's often unnecessary exposure, right, to
Okay.
radiation and such. But we now have something called the TBS, a trabecular bone score, which is software that can be used in conjunction with the DEXA that will look at your spine and give you a qualitative score, which is great. And then there's a newer um, technology. Sorry, I was looking for that word. There's a newer technology as well, but is very infrequent to find. It's not widely available, but I do think that will does have some potential for the future. So
Mhm.
it's not easy to know what your bone quality is, but the point of this is that you can have a score of osteopenia or even osteoporosis and never fracture. And so in the case of myself, I have since been able to increase the bone density to the status of osteopenia. I probably never, even without, let's put it this way, even if I hadn't had the menstrual cycle problems, the size of my bones I'm very, very small boned. I probably would never be classified or have been classified, even without that history, as normal bone, because the amount of mass I have in these little tiny wrists
It's,
is very low. I mean, I measured I measured my wrists against my little 7-year-old cousin. His wrists were bigger than mine.
oh, wow.
So automatically, I'm going to be predisposed to classification of osteopenia because I just have less mass. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to fracture or that I'm fragile. So what I'm trying to say is it's very gray. I'm not trying to say that you should disregard your osteopenia diagnosis if you're small boned, but I'm saying there's a lot of gray area in here, and all this nuance is very hard to convey when people, and especially in this day and age, people want, the quick answer. Give me the one sentence statement.
Yeah.
More complex than that. So essentially, to go back to the question with, sorry, I'm going off on these tangents, but with this runner, we don't know if she's just small boned. So that's why I want to know the history. If I know some of those facts, I have a check mark by that I was asking you about some of those
Yeah.
deets, then I know, okay, there's likely a qualitative issue here. Like, this is something that in the way that I then program, I will take that more into consideration. So before I go on, I don't know if there's anything you want to.
I do have a question. Okay. So just in terms of like all those different, that history, can I think of it like this? Like you have this bone, this T score, and you have this structure. I'm kind of like seeing these into this, that how they work together. And is it that this history gives us a larger indication of how do we improve, like how do we build up, and what do we need to really consider to provide the best care, understanding that this is where we really need to focus on the structure, the joint, or the foundation piece. I'm probably not using the right words, and or this other piece that is really on the bone density that we need to be careful because of the medications, or that we can say, okay, this is how we're going to, is it just like trying to measure? Is that what you're saying then?
Partly. So one of the things that I didn't answer before, and I apologize, was you were asking about what is this quality? What the quality is the structure. The quality is the microarchitecture of the bone. The quality also is related to the metabolic turnover. So there's a cellular process and turnover rate that's happening of the bone throughout your entire life. So it's related to a number of different.
Okay. Yeah.
But yes and no, to answer your question. It does to some extent determine, programming what I'm going to do, but actually for me, it's more of what I'm not going to do.
Okay.
Yeah, because there are certain movements that actually could put the body at risk for fracture if the person has low bone mass. And so I'm going to be more cautious than I would otherwise in those instances with the things that I program. So it's about what we would call contraindications, things that you need to avoid. And so, that it's a gray area of these contraindications, but especially if I know that put it this way, with somebody with low bone mass, I'm generally not going to have them put their whole body weight on a rounded spine. So in other words, this is a common movement in yoga, like the plow pose, or in Pilates, like the rollover.
Okay.
It basically could induce or increases the possibility of a fracture in the spine. I'm just not going to play with that.
No.
And there are some, I'm hearing, it's interesting, I'm hearing some who have been working in the Pilates community, you know, getting more into this area and saying that there aren't contraindications. And, it's true. There actually aren't contraindications identified in the literature, but it has been well documented by many clinically, as well as by the bone health societies and by certain programs that, it's just ethically dangerous and ill-advised. And I certainly am not going to be putting at risk a body that's coming to me with full trust. So that's where it gets a little tricky again, but that's the answer. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to deprive the person of movement. It just means I'm going to be more cautious about the type of movements that I do with them, and the way that I go about the programming. Also, has she ever had a fracture? That's another huge one. I'm assuming no, because technically, if she's had a fracture, that classifies as osteoporosis, but not everybody realizes that. So she might not even know that. If
Right.
she had fractures, and especially if there's ever been a fracture in the spine, that changes the way I will program as well. So, where do I start from though? Really, so after I've done this intake
Yep.
and I also give recommendations of questions that she may want to talk to her doctor about. And especially if she's perimenopausal and she's osteopenia, one of those conversations is, if it's of interest to you, you should talk to your doctor about hormone therapy, because the states have different protocol than other countries. But in the United States, hormone therapy is used to not to treat, but to quote prevent osteoporosis.
Okay.
So she's actually a perfect candidate for that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a very valid discussion for her to talk to her physician about. So I explained to her the questions to help her frame the conversation, because also you have such a limited time with your physician, right? And they will sometimes throw out all these complicated names of complicated medications that make your head spin, and you don't know where to begin. So that's also the conversation, especially if she has been recommended
Right.
medication. I will explain what they do, what they don't do, and how to have that conversation of the questions to ask your doctor for the follow-up.
So
So then
helpful.
now we've moved through that part. Now it's with the exercise, right? And we
Yay!
look at your body.
Right.
And I run through a battery of assessments basically, to both static as well as dynamic assessments to identify where are her deficits, where are challenges, where are disconnects. Because really, I never believe that weightlifting, or especially obviously heavy lifting, is the place to start, that we need to have that solid movement foundation, because without that, we're really not looking long term, because it's about joint health as well as bone health. Like
Yeah.
I've never believed that you can look at one without the other. So I think the whole discussion about bone health is often largely missing the mark. You can't look, I don't see how you can look at one without the other, because if you don't have good joint mechanics and if you don't have healthy movement patterns that are beyond just sort of robotic assessments of full body integration, then you're risking injury down the road. You're not going to have the longevity that you want. And if you're sidelined for an injury, that also puts your bones at loss, because you lose bone mass by being inactive. So it's all related. We have to
So
see everything
related.
as the full picture.
So you mentioned, you're doing a number of movements and understanding both static and dynamic movements. It isn't a functional movement screen because that would be something separate, but it could be like it's the movement screen for just a general health, health quality. I don't know if I could put quality in there, and joint health piece, right?
Right. And yeah, no, I'm not using the FMS functional
No,
movement screen. It's our own screening.
yeah, it's what
That
you created.
Yeah, and a lot of this has to do with integrated movement, which is something that is really, really hard for it's something that you don't hear about in the average public discussion, partly because I think it's not talked about, like visceral manipulation. You're the first person who's ever interviewed me who's known what that is, that's not coming from that world, right?
Right.
Most people also aren't familiar with what movement quality is or what body organization is. And essentially, that's the key to longevity. How you organize your body is the key to performance. It's the key to injury prevention. It's the key to your body lasting for the years to come. And what does that mean? It means, where do you initiate your movement from? And again, outside the movement world, or even like the Laban Bartenieff world, you don't hear about it too much. And yet, if you look at a great athlete, you see it. It's partly what makes a fantastic athlete fantastic. You
Yeah.
notice it in dancers because you think, oh, they move so beautifully, right? But athletes do that too. And we just finished the Olympics. And so I think it's a perfect
Yeah.
time as well to talk about that. That when an athlete moves really well, there is this seamless quality in there's nothing jerky in their motion, right? It's like the movement just flows through their body. That's what makes them a terrific athlete. And you also look at some of those who've had great careers. So, you
Long
think of
career.
like the Tom Brady's, or you think of the Roger Federers, or some of these people. A lot of that, sure, it had to do with their diet and their nutrition and mindset, but it's also the way they move. And certainly, obviously, the cross training element, but it's also the way they move. Their joints last.
That's phenomenal. I'm so appreciative of this conversation because so much of our whole society, our culture, and how we live in the go get her done kind of idea. It's like, and you read the books and say, okay, I just need to get into the gym. And it's not poised in a way of, have you taken any space to learn about your body and how you feel? And I know that interoception is really important to you, and like understanding that yes, let's bring up visceral manipulation again because we both love it. Understanding how, just even if you're so I had it because my uterus was stuck. Like it's like I was stuck. I didn't know that my uterus was stuck, but apparently it was stuck. And then it's not comfortable at all when you get it back aligned.
Let's also clarify for everybody listening, this has nothing to do with pregnancy. I've
No.
had my uterus stuck too. It has to do with your organ, a specific organ not moving freely in the way that it should, and you wouldn't know that that's the issue. You might have back discomfort. Maybe it's your shoulder. So sorry, I just wanted to interject.
It's so true, because this is exactly like if my lower back gets completely jammed, and that's where I was coming, and then everything started coming out of alignment. And because I was a synchronized swimmer, and my idea of movement and how I come into my body and the very micro movements of understanding my body, it helped me when I came into a sport like triathlon, where it's just like big motor movements.
I am so happy you brought up this, because this is one of the terms I wanted to introduce as well, is this discussion of micro movements.
Mm.
There's not enough appreciation of them. And, it's fantastic that you're aware of them and that you recognize them, because so often, especially sports or gym, we're looking at gross movement patterns, right? Great big movements. You're doing a freestyle, right? You're
Yeah.
moving your arms in this specific way. You're doing a deadlift. You're lifting the weight as if you're lifting a very heavy box off the ground. But what are the micro movements that encompass all of that? And where does the movement initiate from? What is the motor control, the term related to how you and the timing and sequencing of the muscle contractions?
Mhm.
All of this subtle movement really does make a difference.
Oh, it's huge. And I think, and is that in part how some of your Pilates, like your Pilates piece? Because my mom is a huge Pilates person. And so she's like, oh, Tennille, I felt this muscle that I never knew existed. With this excitement of getting to know her body. And here she's 72, and and learning this process, and this incredible space that she's creating. She's like, I've never walked so tall in my life. That was our conversation yesterday. And is that where some of that real strength comes through? And maybe that when we talk about our foundation of health before we get to I can lift X amount, is really if we can slow down to know that this is our foundation, then we can really come into what we want, the outcome oriented, I got to X.
Completely, completely. So that's literally what our Buff Bones method does. We use different techniques, and we use different approaches, but all of this is starting out. It all starts with the breath, right?
Mm.
It's the basis for all developmental movement. And we're taking various patterns, and we're helping you also identify how your body operates, and working on some of these key patterns and micro movements, so that by the time you are ready for those big movements, you are so set. It's almost an unconscious pattern that, like, your body knows how to do this on its own. But also, just as your mom recognized, you have this appreciation, and that's also part of the interoception, and it's part of just the embodiment, the sense of awareness in your body. And especially, I think, at midlife, right? There's so many changes, there's so much
Mm.
challenge that we experience with those changes. And then to have this appreciation, though, recognizing, hey, despite the fact that we could go off on every list of
Right.
of perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms, but despite every one of these things happening, wow, my body is still functioning. The fact that, it's still supporting me, it's enabling me to do these movements. The fact that I didn't even realize, hey, when I move my shoulder, I can be aware of what's happening, if I'm shrugging or not. I can feel what's happening through my upper back when I'm leaning forward. Like, all of these things can lead to an appreciation that can balance out some of the challenges and frustration that we experience, and can serve us to really feel a sense of gratitude for all that we have in this body.
You know what you're pointing to, or that just is like popping up, is this idea of, and I talk about this with my athletes once in a while, it's this idea between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And
Mm.
in this shift of, in through perimenopause and for those that are postmenopause, it shifts into more of an like from extrinsic into like I'm coming into intrinsic. And it's almost like I see it's just like wisdom. Like it's just like this wisdom coming into my postmenopause people and giving this in. There's such a life of intrinsic joy, understanding the strength of your body without having to feel like it's measured by.
Yes. And I mean, it makes sense as so much in here. So for one thing, yes, like this element of measuring everything, we're so focused on measurement of everything.
Mm,
And in overemphasizing, my watch and the metrics of everything, I become less reliant on my own internal barometer. And that's literally your internal barometer is your interoception, your ability to sense and perceive internal state. And so if we only rely on what some kind of external metric tells us, we shut down or at least
mm,
diminish some of that internal metrics, if you will. So it's important for us to sometimes put aside and say, okay, what do I even sense rather than what is this telling me that I am doing or experiencing? But also, I think something brilliant of what you're pointing out about that is that it makes sense that we have this shift at this point in life because physiologically, what is menopause? Menopause is a transition from fertility to a different stage in life. And so, if we think almost sort of Darwinian or sort of biologically, it makes total sense that if our focus is less on focusing on the child and keeping them alive,
right.
even, through age 18 or afterwards, that we do have an internal shift that would allow us to focus on something else. And
Mhm.
so it can be a really beautiful change for us at this time, that for many people, whether you've had children or not, maybe has been focused on so many other things, and that it's a time to allow yourself that space to go more internal, to cherish more of these elements and aspects of wisdom that maybe come more to the surface.
Yeah. And if so, when I started and I proposed this idea of like this case study, it is taking, which is this is
Forgot about
what's
that.
so fascinating, is that what we're talking about is, and I say excellence, and I think it scares a lot of people, is like, I want my athletes to understand excellence. And this is excellence. The micro, like the micro movements, the how do I hold myself? How do I breathe? How do I nourish my body both in soul and in by checking in? How do I start to learn how to trust my body, um, and not feel like somebody else is taking care of it, which is a big piece of it, so that you can actually keep, like, a lot of it is having the confidence to ask for the help too.
Absolutely. And the trust part is an interesting one because, especially in this case study, so let's say, somebody didn't trust their body previously. Yeah, it's learning to trust it now. But if you throw in a diagnosis of osteoporosis or osteopenia, you got one more big whammy, which is either further decrease in trust or a renewal of distrust that often occurs because, and I can speak to this very
Mhm.
personally myself, that diagnosis more often than not leads people to feel like their body has in my case it was that it betrayed me,
That's
right?
exactly the word. It's so
And
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, because you think, well, here I have this skeleton that's supposed to support me, and all of a sudden I'm being told that I'm fragile and that I could fracture very easily. And then you go through mind games in a way that I think is different from other types of diagnoses, because there is a metaphorical and literal element to this one, which is you are told you are fragile because, or you're told your bones are fragile, and therefore you feel emotionally fragile. You are told, your skeleton, which is the support system of your body, giving you your upright structure, is not able to be relied on. And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden you're like, wait, darn it, what went wrong? What happened? And it creates a whole different psychological roller coaster that I think is different than other diagnoses because they don't relate to that sense of structure and support, which is literally the role of skeleton or part of the role of the
Right.
skeleton.
Yeah.
So that distrust becomes a real concern. And so, that's part of, in this case study, that's a huge part of what we're doing is we're doing a lot psychologically, emotionally to build confidence, to improve sense of what's called self-efficacy, which is essentially your perceived ability to perform a task. Because for a lot of people, especially if they've ever had even a fracture, they do not trust their body, and they will then have a different and distorted perception of what they're capable of, which is often completely out of touch with what it can do. But we
Yeah.
have to build that back up, and we have to rebuild the trust in the body, and we have to rebuild the confidence, um, along with slowly building this foundation of movement, of patterning, changing habits that may have been going on for years, especially because, say, somebody's had, I mean, who at our age hasn't had some kind of injury, especially if you're an athlete, right? And more often than not, if you haven't completely addressed it, you're going to have some kind of compensatory movement strategy or pattern. And that's going to create some kind of imbalance, which may be fine, but also will probably play out with the way forces are distributed through the body. And that can also not only play out with how you move, how you perform, but also the way that forces then are generated and also distributed through the body for bone health. So again, it's all connected. Like we can't really look at one thing without the whole picture in my mind.
So really a question that we can encourage women to ask is, and this is a tough question, like, am I still out to prove something? Can I let go of trying to prove something to somebody, to be loved, to whatever that emotional connection is? Or am I willing to come back to my foundation, and I still can want that thing. I can still want to perform to my best. I can still want those things, but it's not coming at a push. It's actually coming at a flow. And that sounds, to try to bring it in, is that sounds like what the work you do at Buff Bones is really like, and you mentioned it. I can't get the words exactly how you said it at the very beginning of the interview. But to me, I heard flow and how the joint moves and how the energy, even the flow of energy, and how things are moving all together, including your brain, like how you can feel it. Um,
Yeah, it's really hard to convey this concept, and you bring it up really at a great time because we're seeing so much now, and especially with social media, with empowerment and
Mhm.
newfound feminism, that I think is fantastic. But I don't think that feminism has to be. I think there's different. I don't think. I mean, I went to a women's college, so like I've been embedded in feminist theory and feminism for the past 25 years with this. But I think there's I don't want to say mistake, but I think it's sometimes goes too far to one side of the discussion of, strength, and we're pushing, and we're gonna tackle the patriarchy, and all of this is
Yeah.
great. It's true. But at the same time, sometimes it leads to a side of, if you think of like a yin and yang
Yeah.
element, it's too much aggression.
Yeah.
And there's also a side of feminism that does not need to be suppressed and should be embraced. That soft side is great as well. Let's have the softness, let's have the strength and power. It doesn't have to be one, it doesn't have to be the other. And I think we have to remember that there's a place to meet in the middle.
Oh gosh, it's so perfect. I interviewed Charlotte Therup, and she speaks so perfectly to that point. But you brought in this idea of like bone health. Like this is where bone health comes and resides. And it's not sex based. This is a masculine and feminine that doesn't, we're not talking about that. fits within a sex being male or female. It
Mhm.
it is actually the energies of both that we need to arise and we need to have. And interestingly enough, is that again coming to our foundation and then building up. Yes, you want to have that grit, but that grit comes even actually, I was going to say something, but I don't believe what I was just going to say. It's the grit comes into staying and working through. Like my challenge isn't to go like I love the big motor movements. I love going as hard as I possibly can and just like sweating profusely and like all that stuff. That's easy. The grit for me has to slow down. Like stay in it.
Yes. And I don't think you're alone. I think most of us probably have a tendency toward one side or the other. You love the slow process, or even not process, but just experience, or you love that hard push. And again, it's about how whichever side you tend toward, how can you come more toward the middle, because the other side is easy for you. So working through the other part. And I think that's actually very common also with those who are the adrenaline junkies. And I say that with all respect. Um, that it's,
No hands
yeah,
go up. Yeah.
it's really hard to be still. It's really hard to meditate. It's really hard to go into your slow internal movement practice. And just because it's not something that you like to do or don't like to do doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's again, we need the balance. We need a little bit of all of that. So for those who are like, it's all about heavy lifting, there's a lot to say about heavy lifting, and that's where the research has pointed for increases in bone density after menopause with osteoporosis. But it's not how how do you get there? And
How do you?
it's
Yeah.
not even the whole picture once you're doing that. Like, what
Ah,
is your movement foundation? What are your micro movements? What's your balance like? How is your mobility? All of this comes into play. And then additionally, if you're somebody who just loves doing yoga, that's fantastic, but you do need to actually get the weights going as well.
right.
You need to actually get those heavier loads through your body. So again, how can we come to the middle?
My goodness, what a conversation. Is there, before I transition into what your free gift is and into my final three questions, which are about you actually, not about bone health, or they could be, they actually are totally, they could be linked too. Is there anything that you feel like we've missed that you want our listeners to hear in this conversation?
I think one other aspect about this has to do with just your nervous system, and it
Mm,
ties into everything we've been talking about. And it just we haven't mentioned it by name. So again, like hyperregulation, or I should say, hyperactive, really, nervous system, especially for those who are adrenaline junkies. That's part of what this is, of the slowing down and the ability to go a little bit more internal to help regulate that, because sometimes on the flip side as well, um, we have some kind of traumatic experience in our past, whether we're aware of it or not,
mm,
but that there needs to be an addressing of the nervous system really just from the start. So that's also partly what I like to do, is helping a down regulation. Like, are you able to down regulate? Because that's a huge bit of information as well.
oh,
Like,
it's such a that, yeah.
yeah, like, are you able to slow down, or do you just
Mm.
immediately fall asleep when you're trying to do that? That's a signal, or
Or
that's
do you avoid?
yes.
Like, do you just keep your, I know that one thing that I'm looking at a little bit of myself too is like thinking about, can I just sit in quiet? Or do I always have to put the podcast on?
Right.
Right? Like, oh, I want to learn. It's so good to constantly be in this process of, I'm going to learn, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. It's all for the best of my athletes and for myself. And it's, whatever. Can I actually sit?
Yeah, and I think that's really hard for some people, and I don't believe that it's a case of like some people just can't do it. Everybody can do it. It's a practice. And it's identifying, okay, what are the obstacles? what's preventing me from being able to do that? Because it's healthy. It's nourishing for your body. And that's, I think, also part of then this discussion that gets that can easily get overlooked because it doesn't necessarily have value, right? So we have to look at what are we valuing and see
Mm,
the bigger picture of society, and maybe not even society, like where the state of women's health is right now. Like what are things that are valued and what are things that maybe are not as valued, and what gets talked about, what doesn't, and what gets
mm.
attention and what doesn't.
Well, yeah, because we're on like a biomarker, you know, everything can come down to your biomarkers, and let's figure out it's in the blood. We can read the blood, like, oh, so on and so forth, or, depending on where you're coming into the health, and we can really get exactly how many omega-3s you need or exactly what you need for that. And as long as you're checking all those boxes, you're going to be okay. But I think what you're pointing to in the nervous system is actually massive, like, in terms of where is our joy, like just the general mental health. And
Yes. Sure, there are certain things that can be measured that can tell you that, like your cortisol levels or, other different blood tests can be dictating things, but whatever happened to just me being able to say, yeah, I'm really good. I feel grounded. I feel centered. And we all know this. And yet again, sorry, I'm going to take you off on this tangent again, but it's about intuition and talk about what is one of the most quote unquote feminine qualities. Intuition.
mm,
Is it appreciated? No. Why not?
mm,
Why don't we, create a movement to recognize and appreciate intuition? Because intuition is undervalued and it not only deserves more attention, but it's one of our great traits. It's one of our great assets is our ability to really just have that gut feeling that I just know that things are going to be right, or I just know that that's not the right. I don't know why rationally that I should do this, and when I'm making a decision, but just my gut tells me I don't want to do it. No matter
mm,
what, that's usually the right the right decision. The right option is what your gut tells you. So part of the ability to tap into that intuition is through working through your nervous system, is through slowing down, is through quieting the chatter, is through pausing and just listening. And it comes up. It just you have this revelation like, oh, that's what I want. That's it.
mhm.
That's the answer.
Do you know if because I actually haven't listened or read, or I'm not familiar so much with intuition comes from a place of quiet, whereas judgment would come from a place of, I want to say, noise, of
Yeah.
like because we might come to a decision and say, well, I'm going to do this because my gut tells me, but it's actually informed from biases and from a lot of noise, and expertise on social media, like, whatever it might be. This is
Yeah.
noise that gets us like, well, it's my gut is that I have to do this thing, but that's not from a place of quiet and um yet coming in, centering, grounding, and then coming out. And I think that there's an important piece there. And I haven't done a lot of reading on this, but do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts on it. Yes. I remember I did a workshop many years ago about this idea of intuition and you're you're spot on. It's removing or dimming at least because it's never really an on or off switch, right? Nothing.
No.
It's about taking like here's the switch behind me and I'm going to amplify it or I'm going to dim it. And so it's about dimming that noise, that external noise, so that you can hear more of what your own desires and needs are. And the more we tap into that, you can't make a mistake when you literally listen to what your intuition is telling you. You're hearing what your deep needs and desires and wants are. And so, the way to be able to distinguish between the noise And the intuition is to slow down, because I've struggled with this a lot in my life, being like, well, is this really what I want? Or is
Mhm.
this what I think, like what I'm hearing? Because it's
Yeah.
really hard often to tell the difference. And I have found that the best way to do that is just to pause, is to try and clear my mind, whether you want to call it meditation or you want to call it something else. Maybe it's, for some people, even maybe just going for a walk. And, when thoughts are running through your head, you try and just let it go. And you just focus on, maybe what you're seeing, or if your eyes are closed and maybe you're listening to a meditation. But whatever it is, you're trying to pause and just quiet your mind so that you can really hear what surfaces.
Wow, so beautiful. It's incredible for me to think that this conversation, like I just keep on coming back, like this conversation about this beautiful athlete that wants to do all the right things for their bone health is coming down to so many different things than we from our starting points. And I think that that's really encouraging. And I think that we all can make these changes. And this is like this is like moving us toward this. We can make changes to our health, our bone quality, all like I don't want to just say bone density. It's not just about that. Like I know that's important to buff bones, is reminding
I
them.
talk about bone health as comprising everything, elements of bone density, ideally the elements of bone quality that we don't really know if whether we're improving or not. Maybe you have access to metrics and equipment or blood work. Maybe not, but also, there's fall prevention, balance, all of these things, bone protection, and also just resiliency, right? Like how you move and how you move well, because there's more also to density, or than just density, because there's a resilient quality to bones. And I use that as a metaphor as well for the whole body.
Mhm.
The collagenous element, the collagen proteins in the bone
Yeah.
are play a very dominant role, in addition to the crystalline structures. So like there's an element of flexibility that needs to be there in the bone, and we need that in our bodies too. So really, we're trying to create these strong, resilient bodies.
And we can, even
Yes.
now, starting now.
Yes.
So the thing that you are going to provide us is an experience with you and a workout specifically that allows us to come into touch with this, with what it is that you do at Buff Bones. And so everybody go and click on the link that is going to be there, or through the process that we're going to make sure is really clear for you on this on your website. And that you're getting this interview on. And I have 3 more questions. Are you ready for them?
Um, maybe, maybe not. We'll see.
Oh, yeah. They're good. Oh, they're gonna be perfect because I think I've forgotten to,
Yes.
remind you that I asked these 3 questions of every single speaker. I think that it'll be all right. What are you thankful for right now?
I'm thankful really for the people in my life. Um, yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for just the love that I have, just the support, and those who have stuck by me, and whether it's been since birth or even just in recent years, that life is very fragile. I learned that the hard way through the pandemic, and so I'm just so grateful for those I have in my life.
Mhm. Wow, wonderful. What advice do you wish you had learned 10 years earlier?
That I can let go more. Yeah, that I wish that I had learned that things are gonna work out however they end up working out.
Mhm.
And, to be easier on myself as a result.
That's amazing. It's amazing to me when you say that, because I think of like all the things you've done and I think about how you have navigated your career from, a young age of having that, where we started this conversation of your, your diagnosis at 28 and how that started getting you onto a path. And if I can really listen to that and say, how we navigate will work out in the way that it works out, and where we are right now is where we need to be. And it's beautiful. So I hear you and I listen from the wisdom. What is a quote or saying that you live by?
It's funny because when you were asking me this before, I was like, I'm not sure. We'll see. And you know what just came to mind, ironically, is my grandfather used to say something that I realize is the thing that I really do live by. He used to say, where there's movement, there's life.
Oh, amen.
And it really is, I really do live by that. Every morning, every single morning, it's a non-negotiable for me that I have to do a little movement practice. It keeps me functioning and out of pain, because otherwise I have trouble, I struggle. But also it helps me so much emotionally. It helps me clear my head. And if I don't do that, if I don't do my movement, I don't feel great. I'm kind of cranky. And then, but it's like, once I've done that, all right, I can tackle the day. I can tackle anything. It's what grounds me.
Movement. You can say it once more, because I want to say movement is life, but say your grandfather's saying once more.
Where he used to say, he said it tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
meaning like, if you're not moving, well, you might not be alive. Yeah.
But
But where there's movement, there's life.
perfect. I'll leave the last word to you. I can't thank you enough for this incredible conversation and for being part of this beautiful masterclass series, supporting women just here in this athletic life in perimenopause and beyond.
Well, I thank you. This has been a real treat. Just such a joyful conversation, and I loved where we went with it. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you.